And boom, we are live. What's up, everybody? Couple Casuals Podcast, Quick Rips, episode number 3. I am your host, Stefo. I got something I want to talk about today. Jake Paul and Logan Paul. These guys are pretty relevant in the news quite frequently, especially in the combat sports world. You know what? It's pretty interesting. It seems like the consensus is the majority of people absolutely hate Jake Paul. And like some people like Logan Paul, but then also don't really like Logan Paul. These guys are pretty interesting guys. You know, they started from Vine. Do you guys remember Vine? Vine was that 6-second video app that people pretty much used to entertain themselves while they were taking a poop. I always enjoyed Vine. I always did. I always enjoyed it. You know, 6-second video, quick, rapid pace type of content. I enjoyed it. I made Vines too. I remember back, I think it was like 2012, 2013. I enjoyed making some Vines. So before we get started, let me throw up some of my Vines from back in the day to take a little trip down memory lane. So roll the clips.
Episode of Cottage Life. Get the water! We're running out of time!
The fuck is this? It was entertaining, and it's amazing to look back at videos. That's one of the reasons why I love making videos or creating things, because years back, you get to look back at them. The one question or accusation that seems to be going around all the time is, are they real boxers? People are always accusing them, saying, these guys are not real boxers. They're not real fighters. They're just YouTubers. I think there's a couple moving parts that go into something like this. And I think there's respect where respect's got to be given. And then there's also like a little bit of like, okay, the other side of it is where it's like, hey, maybe that's a little bit too much, or maybe that's a little bit too far, and this and that. But the main question seems to be is, are these guys real boxers? Are they real fighters? At this given time, yeah, they were YouTubers, and yeah, they still YouTube, and yeah, they engage with social media a lot. And maybe, you know, some would say there's some little douchebag elements in there too. But I think there's reasonings for that as well. There's a lot of reputable people that have come out and went against them pretty hard. Like Dana White, for example, he's been pretty vocal about how he thinks Jake Paul's not a real fighter and he hasn't fought anybody specific. But then on the other hand, there's been some other reputable people that have backed them, like Mike Tyson, for example. Mike Tyson's been pretty vocal about how he thinks both of them are real boxers, and he loves those guys, and he thinks that it's very good that they're bringing eyes to the sport. And to give respect where respect's due, the two have pretty much dipped their toes in everything. Like from Vine to social media, of course, to Disney. Jake was a Disney star at one point. Music, they started rapping. And now, as most recently, they're in boxing, which happens to be like the craziest thing to want to get into, by the way, because it can be very dangerous. So you look at it like, wow, these guys can just do YouTube or do their other thing, but they've decided to get into boxing. So you got to respect that to a certain extent, because they're rich. They don't need to go in there and fight with people. Like, they don't need to go out there and risk getting embarrassed, risk getting brain damage or whatever it is, because it's not just one fight that they're fighting for. There's a preparation that's involved. There's sparring. There's all this dedication, diet, et cetera, and money invested as well. So it's not like they're going out there and having like tennis competitions. Like, this is legit fighting. They're fighting like legit. I just like to give everything a fair shake, because when you look at it like this, it's like these guys are just a couple kids from Ohio that started making 6-second videos that went from here to here to here, and then just ended up figuring it out. And now they decided, hey, you know what? Let's do boxing. Let's do that. Now, when it comes to boxing or combat sports, what makes a real fighter? That's the question. Okay, what makes a real fighter? What makes you a real fighter? I think what makes you a real fighter is a guy who shows up every day, who's dedicated to his craft, who is in the gym, putting in the work, doing the road work, doing everything that entails to be a real fighter, and they're showing up when it's time to fight, and they're fighting, and they're giving it hell. And as far as I can see, I think that's what they're doing to a certain extent. Now, one would argue their opponents are handpicked. Well, to be fair, Logan Paul just came off of fighting Floyd Mayweather in an 8-round exhibition match, I understand, but he still went in there for 8 rounds with Floyd Mayweather and lasted 8 rounds. Like, that's pretty good for somebody who's been boxing for 3 years. So think about that for a second. You started boxing 3 years ago, and then 3 years later, you're fighting in a stadium against Floyd Mayweather in front of like millions of people. It's not bad. It's pretty good. But I think this all really started on August 26th, 2017. That was when Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather. This was the first time any of this sort of thing pretty much, well, it's happened before previously, but not to this magnitude. They came together and fought. And I think that's what opened the gates to where we are today, where now you see YouTube fights, You see TikTok fights, and a lot of people, they don't like it. They don't really like it at all, especially the real old-fashioned boxing heads and stuff like that. They don't really like it. You look at it like this. Number one, it brings in a lot of viewership. It brings in a lot of eyes. Floyd Mayweather versus Logan Paul did over 1 million pay-per-view eyes. That's good for the sport of boxing, because maybe you retain fans. Maybe you retain people that stick around to the sport. Maybe some kid that likes Logan Paul ends up watching that, and he ends up going to his local boxing gym and starts boxing, and maybe ends up being very, very good, and he makes a career out of it. Whatever it could be. Like, look at Logan Paul, for example. The guy just fought Floyd Mayweather, literally arguably one of the best boxers ever to step foot on this earth. I actually met him before. He was a pretty nice guy. Throw up the picture. Let's move on to Jake Paul for a second. The guy that everybody, like most people, hate, but you know, he's snatching Floyd Mayweather's hat.
I'm my own boss. I'm my own boss. One night, got your hat. Got your hat.
He's causing a bunch of problems at UFC events. They're screaming, "Fuck Jake Paul." What is he doing? He's creating friction. He's generating a buzz around his name. He's coming off of a big win against a former NCAA champion, a former world champion, that being Ben Askren. He starts them unconscious in the first round in their fight. The guy can punch. It looks like it anyway. A lot of people say, oh, Ben was out of shape. He just coming off a hip surgery, all this thing. Nonetheless, he's been around the block a couple times. That was still impressive. But to be fair, Ben is not exactly a boxer. You don't really see him ever doing any stand-up, especially in any of his fights. He always goes straight for the takedown. Now he's in the midst of his biggest challenge yet. On August 29th, he's going to be fighting Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley is a legit competitor. Like, he's a legit opponent. This guy actually starts guys unconscious in the UFC, like top guys like Darren Till, Robbie Lawler. He's a former UFC champion. If Jake can get by Tyron Woodley on August 29th, a lot of people are going to be impressed. Now, he is, I think, almost 40 years old. He's lost his past 3 fights, and he's on his way out. He's calling out like Canelo and stuff, which is like, okay, I don't know. Like come on, guys. Like, wait a second. Just hold on. Just stop for a second. Hold on a second.
Few moments later.
Drink a coffee.
One eternity later.
You know what I mean? Relax. And then continue picking the guys that you're picking. The question is he a real boxer? That I'm going to leave with you. I don't know. Like, that's up to you. What do you think a real boxer is? When he fights real boxers, okay, fair enough. That could be a good argument. He hasn't fought any real boxers, but I'm not going to take away from the fact that he's still showing up and getting in that squared circle and fighting and just putting it on the line. I'll leave it to you guys. What do you guys think? You think he's a real boxer? You be the judge. But that's it for today, guys. I appreciate you guys stopping by for a Couple Casuals. This is Couple Casuals Podcast, Quick Rips, episode number 3. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. I appreciate you. Until next time, we'll see you. Boom. Salute.